morning, everyone. My name's Lisa Tesler. I'm the Executive Director of Pennsylvania's Developmental Disabilities Council, and I am also the track monitor for this session this morning. So welcome to the Community Alliance Summit. You are in the panel discussion on domestic violence. This session runs from 10:15 to 11:15, I believe. And we will be talking with several experts that have agreed to join us today to share important information on this topic. So a few reminders about the technical side of things. During this session, you can use the chat feature or the Q&A to type questions for the panelists. We love discussion, so please make sure you use this feature. If you would like to be unmuted to ask a question, please use the raise hand function on the bottom of your screen. And we are working on activating the closed caption on the left side of your screen, so keep your eyes open for that. And the ASL will be running for the entire length of the presentation. And I will remind you that at the end of the summit, we will be sharing an evaluation, that be a survey that we would ask you to complete. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Denise, who is the first speaker for our panel. Welcome, Denise, and thank you and all of the speakers for joining us today.
Thank you so much, Lisa. Hi, everyone. Welcome again to the DV panel. I am so excited that you have chosen to join us. I am from the Pennsylvania Coalition Against Domestic Violence. We are a statewide coalition that oversees 59 local domestic violence programs that cover all 67 counties within the Commonwealth. You will be hearing today from 3 of those local programs, and the speakers will introduce themselves at the start of their presentation. Again, as Lisa stated, we welcome any questions in the Q&A or in the chat, and we will endeavor to answer those as we can during the presentations. We've also left some time at the end of all 3 presentations so we can address any questions at that time. I'd like to remind you that if at any time you feel any emotional stress or trauma that is triggered by the content or the things that people are saying within this presentation, please feel free to private chat me. My name again is Denise Scotland, and I will answer the issues that you have. At this time, I'd like to turn it over to Jeff and Leon. Thank you.
Thank you, Denise. Hope everyone can hear me and see me pretty well. So I'll go ahead and start by introducing myself. I'm Jeff Lambert from Crisis Center North. I'm the education coordinator for Crisis Center North. And that means that I work on implementing our prevention education plans and programming with a number of different school districts. My background before working as the education coordinator here was that I was a college professor at Duquesne University and Thiel College, teaching philosophy, healthcare ethics, and a number of different special topics courses through the Honors College. But I've always had a community engaged approach to teaching and learning, and working with Crisis Center North to help increase healthy relationships and really focus on mental health has been a great goal and great process for me to do, and I'm happy to talk about that more with you. But I'm going to turn this over to Leon to introduce himself before we get started.
Yes, I'm Leon Strimmel. I've been working at Crisis Center North as a prevention educator for the last 11 years or so. Prior to that, I was a guidance counselor at a high school for 35 years, retired from that, and then got connected with Crisis Center North, again in a rural in which I go into schools to talk to students about developing healthy relationships with themselves and others. Okay, Jeff.
So hopefully you guys can hear me a little better. I just got a message saying I was a little bit muffled. Sometimes my microphone cuts out a little bit, so just let me know. But I also want to repeat the disclaimer before we get going that Denise had mentioned, that some of the content being addressed could be traumatic. It could reactivate some, troubling memories for you or anxiety. So please reach out to Denise Scotland through private messaging if you'd like to talk about that. And, feel free to also take some time away if you need to. So today Leon and I are going to be talking about mental health and how that connects to domestic violence and how we in prevention education are trying to address that. So first, the theme of the conference is recover, rebuild, reform. In terms of thinking about recover, I always think that starts with diagnosing, understanding what needs to be recovered from. So I think that the issue that we see, and I'll talk more about this, but Pennsylvania is rated second best in the nation for mental health care provision, but there are still so many failures in inability to meet the need. So I think that as we talk about that, we're going to see that the recovery just means increasing that awareness, increasing the ability to provide service, and reducing the stigma around mental health. I also want to make sure that it's clear here what I am discussing as the connection between mental health and domestic violence. I think that it's an over-exaggeration in the media and other kind of common plays where you think of mental health as leading to aggressive behavior, untreated mental health concerns as leading to aggressive behavior. I think that there is it's been shown that there are correlations between mental health concerns and domestic violence, but those are typically related to victimization. Sometimes when you're talking about actually perpetration, it's related more to someone with intense depression who is neglecting a child or partner, right, and not able to, do what they would like to do to be in that relationship. And the emotional imbalance could be more of a manic or bipolar concern. And so I think that those are going to be not necessarily what we consider in the range of abuse, but things that would be impacting those relationships and make them more difficult. We also want to talk about the fact that COVID in general has had a significant impact on the stress of these individuals, that they're, how much stress they're undergoing, and how that has reduced their access to the care that they need or would like to seek out. So as I mentioned, Pennsylvania is ranked second in the US for mental health care for both youth and adults. But while that's the case, nearly 1 in 5 adults in Pennsylvania experience some form of mental illness. 1 in 10 youth experience some form of mental illness. And about 7% of youth have had a major depressive episode and these stats are from 2018. So major depressive episode in 2018, and 57% of those did not receive any care following that major depressive episode. And then it was, for every 480 individuals in Pennsylvania who would actually like to receive care or do need care, there's only one mental health care professional that can provide that service. So there's a huge demand and a huge inability to meet that demand. And while those stats are from 2018, that is from the most recent 2021 State of Mental Health in America report. And I think that if we look at this in relation to some of the other kind of co-occurring concerns that we have for domestic abuse, we see that individuals that get wrapped up in the juvenile justice system, they have it's anywhere from 50 to 75% of youth who get caught up in the process of the juvenile justice system have some form of mental illness that is not being addressed, mainly because the facilities that they get put into don't have the proper staff to address these concerns. They don't have the ability to do screening for these issues. And those then kind of, under those circumstances, those really stressful, traumatic circumstances of being in the juvenile justice system, can create even more behavioral disruptions and issues that are looked at as though it's just this person's a problem, when really there's an underlying untreated thing that this person isn't receiving. And then if we look at that too, in terms of the connection with disability, individuals with disabilities, we see that the rate of mental health concerns doubles when there is either a intellectual disability or a physical disability, and it goes more than double when there is a combination of the two. So clearly, mental health to me seems to be a fundamental issue that is connected to, at least correlated to, a number of other risk factors for domestic abuse. So that, I think, is where we start with the recovery, is making sure that individuals get those services, we provide those to them. So I want to turn it over to Leon to talk about some of the programs that we do that are addressing these.
Yes, At Crisis Center North, we realized that this is a big issue dealing with the mental health part of it. For the last 11 years, we've run a number of programs at Crisis Center North, but for the last 11 years, one of the big programs that we try to get our students in high school involved directly with is what we call peer-to-peer empowerment program. And in this program, it's set up so that students actually can see that they have the power to make positive changes within their school, addressing issues that may be going on in their school. The program is set up so that we run 2 workshops in the fall, one usually in October and one in November. And we have anywhere between 10 to 15 schools come to this workshop. Each school sends between 5 and 10 students to the workshop itself. They pick these students, the sponsors pick the students from a variety of different ways. Because we don't want just the students that are on the top of the class or always the ones that are being involved with activities. We want some of those marginal students that are maybe being abused themselves to be part of this workshop, to be able to attend it and figure out what we can do and what they can do actually to correct situations in their school. So again, we have 2 workshops in the fall. The first one is October, second one is in November, and then we have a sort of roundup in between November and April. They work on a project dealing with issues that they want to deal with. The students get to pick the issue that they want to deal with within their school. They put that project together, and then in April, we all meet back together to see how the success of their program was, and they can explain what the benefits and maybe some of the issues that they had to deal with going through that process. In these workshops, the first one deals with mostly what is going on in their schools. We want the students to be able to open up their eyes and see what's actually happening in their schools. And we work with a concept called optimistic bias to start off with. And optimistic bias deals with people feel as though bad things happen to other people. It doesn't just happen to themselves. Where it happens in other schools, it just doesn't happen it won't happen in their school. And we want our students to open their eyes to that. So we give them a number of examples of our local school districts that may have had issues that they have run into. For example, several years back, there was a young lady, her name was Demi Cucci, and she was a very well-rounded student in the high school that she was at. She was a cheerleader, was on a soccer team, so on and so forth. But she had a boyfriend that became very abusive and controlling to her, to the point where they were going to break up. On the day that they were going to break up and separate, happened to be her 16th birthday. And at that point, her boyfriend came and visited her at her house to talk about the breakup. And along with some other things that he brought with her that was hers that he wanted to give back to her, he brought a knife with her, and he ended up stabbing her 16 times and killing her on her birthday. We talk about other students. Again, these are all in our local school districts around Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, where the student was bullied for a number of years, bothered by other students, harassed by other students, to the point where he couldn't take it anymore mentally. And again, he brought a knife to school and ended up stabbing 24 students and staff at that point. Okay. So these are the things we want our students to realize it can happen at their school. Every school is vulnerable for doing that. But it's much more than the things that we see in a newspaper. We hear, about that, the physical abuse and the torture that can happen there. And so we want our students to open our eyes up to everybody that can be abused and the type of abuse that can occur. So when we talk about who can be abused, the first thing we want to make sure is that the students realize that themselves, the actual people that are coming to the workshop, can be a person that can be abused. And as they look at their schools, they find out that there's a number of groups within their schools. And a lot of times we call these cliques or groups that sort of bond together, people that have friendships. And we know that these groups exist in every school district. And when I first talked to the schools about this, they said, oh, no, it doesn't happen in ours. But as we talk about them and they open their eyes, they find out it does happen to them. Where we have different groups of maybe people with different ethnic origins or different color, or different religions, or the different genders that we have, the males or the females, or different economical or social divisions that we have within our people. And one of the biggest ones is the people dealing with disabilities within our schools, mental or physical disabilities that they may have. And these people are all in these groups and they sort of keep together. And what happens is we find out that all these groups and every student individually in a school wants two things. One, they want respect from others. And the other ones that they need because of our human culture, we need positive relationships with one another. And when we don't get these things, that's just when the students feel as though they become abused. So when we talk about abuse, most of the time people think of abuse as being physical, like the stabbings or the killings that we have, or the people getting beat up or punched or that type of abuse. That's true. Yes, physical abuse, the hitting, the pushing, the shoving, the sexual abuse, that is one of them. But there's also other abuses that go unseen within the schools, such as the verbal abuse that people occur. This can be confrontive, maybe people saying things in the classroom or in the locker rooms or in the cafeteria, but more than likely, a lot of times it's also happening on the internet or through social media. The students are abusing each other verbally through the social media, and it has a mental effect on our students. The mental effect of abuse is also one that's definitely overlooked many times, where students are excluded from one another. And that exclusion breaks down that relationship that people need. And when they feel as though they're excluded, that's a sort of another form of bullying that may be going on. The mental, the physical, and the emotional, the exclusion causes people to, again, have mental issues that can cause harm to themselves and others. Well, once the students acknowledge this in the peer-to-peer workshops, what we encourage them then to do, well, look through after school to see what types of abuses are actually occurring, and then come up with some type of project or idea as to how these things of respect and developing healthy relationships can be connected and put together a project that they can do in order to do that. Over the last 11 years, we've had students to come up with amazing projects in all these school districts. If we sort of look back at our numbers, probably over 11 years, there's over 15 school districts, as I mentioned, have been involved with this program, which would involve over 75,000 students that have been impacted by this peer-to-peer empowerment program. The students come up with some really great projects that they work on. It's all self-driven by themselves. They come up with the idea. They have to plan out how they want to do it and how they want to implement it. And they just develop some great programs. If I had more time, I could get into a lot of the different activities and projects that they do. But they definitely have had a great impact within the school. Especially, I get reports back from the counselors, the teachers, and the students themselves about how much of an impact and change that they have had in their attitude to how they treat and talk to other students within the school. And of course, to try to help them become better, have better relationships with one another, and so on and so forth. So I think Jeff wants to sort of jump back in here and tie this all together for us.
I don't think we have time, Leon. I think we're going to have to go on to the next session, but thank you for that. We can talk more about it during Q&A, but thank you, everybody.
Okay.
So that means we're turning it over to Toby.
Wow. Love a quick transition. What's up, y'all? My name is Toby. Definitely let's make sure to have time in the Q&A so we can get some of those wrap-ups and get into it together a little bit more. So my name's Toby. I work at a place called Lutheran Settlement House in Philadelphia. We're one of the domestic violence agencies there. I come to this movement that I've been in for the past 13 or 14 years now, from activism, starting with an anti-war movement and then onto environmental work and in racial justice campaigns, like working to lower incarceration rates and implement transformative justice efforts in places that I've lived. And I'm just really excited to be here, y'all. In thinking about that theme of recover, rebuild, and reclaim, my mind actually went back a few decades. We're going to get into some movement history real quick. In thinking about the ways that our movement to support survivors of domestic violence currently collaborates with the police, why that happened and what the outcome is, and then a little bit of where can we go from there? What is it that we can rebuild back to? So just the real quick and dirty of it, trying to make sure to fit within the time. I'll just give kind of a top level that we can trace the roots of our modern day movement against domestic violence back to the women's rights and Black liberation movements of the 60s and 70s. Yes, for sure, things were happening before that, but that's kind of where right now we're situated within. It's this movement that started back then in the 60s and 70s. And it started real grassroots, real community level, right? Mostly women teaming up to share space in their home, to put out flyers with their phone numbers on it, saying, if you're in trouble, call me. If your partner's hurting you, if your husband's beating you, call this number. Sometimes they would show up at the workplace of that abusive partner, try and harass and intimidate him into stopping or getting him into some kind of like alcohol or anger management treatment, all of that kind of stuff. Just doing whatever they could at this individual and group level, while also being part of movements for justice, trying to change our entire society, right? That was a big part of it. Understandably, very frantic work that they were a part of, mostly being done unpaid, being done on the margins of the other work that these women were up to, mostly women at the time. This is also matching a time when the state is starting to ramp up incarceration, right? Mostly with the drug war, the prison industrial complex is booming, and it becomes this natural fit for some people that the government can offer grant funding to do this work around domestic violence. It just has a couple of strings attached that map onto what they're looking to do in the incarceration and with the criminal justice work. So the movement to support survivors of domestic violence begins to shift away from the community and towards that funding, right? So what we see is the work becoming professionalized. We see survivors being turned into victims that need rescuing, frequently is the terminology used. And we see abusive partners being turned into perpetrators, people who need to be locked up and incarcerated. A lot of this history is coming thanks to a group called Insight, Women of Color Against Violence. One of their members, Ananya Bhattacharjee, says, and I'll quote her, "We can't go march against the police for police brutality one day and then go to them for domestic violence help the next, as if they're two separate institutions." So this funding really put a big rift within the movement. And so, right, because of this rift, because of the money going along with it, saying that if you want this funding, you have to collaborate with the police. You have to work within the system, right? You can't be doing any of that stuff on the side, trying to change the system, trying to decarcerate our community instead of incarcerate the community. I'm just going to offer a kind of lengthier quote from Insight Women of Color Against Violence again about some of these moments. Because what they said in Insight is, it made sense to go after this funding, but no one ever paused long enough to say, is the criminal justice system actually leading to less violence? Or is it just funding our movement, funding our centers? So what they say is, what we found out is that study after study after study is showing that prisons don't have an effect on crime rates. They don't lead to less violence. Long story short, most people are in prison because of drugs. You can get drugs easier in prison, and there's no real treatment facilities there. If you're incarcerated for crimes of poverty, what does a police record and a prison sentence do besides make it more difficult to get a job? When we talk about issues of violence, if the issue is just a few wacko dudes that need to lock up, maybe the prison system might make sense as a strategy. But when we have studies in which half of men say that they would rape someone if they thought they could get away with it, you either have to lock up half the male population or find another solution. And so to keep it real, our movement did not end up collaborating with the police as much as we do because they're the best way to help. We do it because that's where the money is tied to. And that's what we're looking at. That's what we talk about a lot at Lutheran Settlement House, is how we're so tied to the money and what to do about it instead. I'm going to share my screen for a second here. and offer some of the work and the ways we've been talking about it. So we're getting into how survivors of violence and the system of policing are connected. Definitely a big topic, right? That was the quickest and the dirtiest of histories. Definitely, I'll have my contact info on here. We can talk more anytime. Something that we have done is in doing workshops about defunding the police and how that is a survivor support issue is across New Jersey, across Pennsylvania, even down to Florida. We've done workshops with advocates, and we've asked people again and again, what are the ways that calling the police has helped your clients, the survivors in your life? How have the police harmed or not helped the survivors in your life when they've been called? This is just a sample. These are the answers, I believe, from a New Jersey training. They're all pretty similar. So we would invite people within the training in a different format than this to double click on, there used to be a lot of blank post-its. You could double click on it and type answers themselves. So here's some of what people said for ways police have benefited the survivors that have called them. What we found really is that they fit into three main categories. I left this, someone put it, so I left it, that people with privilege, police means safety for them frequently, just as an overarching reality that we know is there. But basically the things that help are, with a little bit of court type stuff down here in the lower left. Sometimes they help in the moment. We hear of abusive partners being removed, the police who respond being supportive, they can de-escalate, all very possible. And then by and large and everywhere we've ever talked to people, the most help that police have done is tell people about the resources for survivors, whether that's how to get a restraining order, protection from abuse order, if it's inviting out, this is the domestic violence response teams they have out there, getting them into our services as domestic violence agencies. Far and away, the most help that police offer is with this piece of being called on 911, showing up and saying, here's a hotline card, or here's this resource packet that includes the domestic violence info. I'm guessing y'all can tell that I have an opinion on this. And so just to keep it honest, keep it 100, we have always in every training needed to add a second slide so people can write about the harms that are done. I've yet to need to add a second slide for the help that's offered. I didn't order these in any way. I'm just gonna pause for 30 seconds or so you can take them in, and then I'll switch to the next one as well. These are some of the ways that police have harmed survivors when they get called. And then a few more. A lot of what we see from this group in particular is they're talking about the LGBT community. They're talking about immigrant survivors and people who speak in language other than English. We've also done this with groups that work with people with disabilities or have an advocate that specializes with people with disabilities. And there's just even more slightly different around police arriving and not believing folks, feeling like, oh, they're just crazy, and using other slurs as a way to, right, like it says up here, to tell the survivor to talk it out, to minimize what's going on, to gaslight that survivor and say that they don't really know anyway. Once someone calls multiple times, right, we'll see a lot of the police saying like, well, we've been here before. We don't think you're gonna get the help that we are telling you to take. So there's nothing we can do anymore. So here we are, right? We're in this situation. We've got our funding. We're super tied to the police as the main option that people in our society are offered. And what I'll put forward is that this movement to defund the police is exactly a part of the survivor support movement. Because what defunding the police means is being really thoughtful about where we're allocating the money that we do have as a society. And instead of continuing to put more and more and more of it, outsizing the budget like wild, into the police as the people who respond to everything, but then find out either cause more harm or offer very little help, right? Defunding the police is about being more thoughtful of that and putting the funding where we're gonna need it and where it can be best used. This next slide is a quick quote from a group up in Minneapolis working on issues of policing. They say, police abolition work is not about snapping our fingers and magically defunding every department in the world instantly. Rather, we're talking about a gradual process of strategically reallocating resources, funding, and responsibility away from police and towards community-based models of safety, support, and prevention. One last piece that I'll offer on why I believe that defunding the police and refunding our community efforts, working to decouple that money that we get from being mandated to work within the policing system and into working in community instead. One other reason besides the harms that they cause to survivors when they call that I'll put out there is just a quick snapshot. This is the power and control wheel. I'm guessing it's very familiar for most, if not all of you, talking about what domestic violence really looks like frequently. And to just notice on something like a power and control wheel, how few of these things are actually against any kind of law. And at its base, what the police are there for, allegedly anyway, right, is to enforce laws. So we're asking them to fix a problem that they actually are not even set up to do. And now here we are in the system where they're trying in the best of light and not being able to. So real quick, we'll offer two ways to go about this that we see. One is to address the harms that are caused by police, to work against those harms, to work for defunding the police and getting the money into places that won't cause those harms. Another option is to work on expanding the good, and whatever your take on that is. It might mean training the police so that they can do those good things better. It might mean trying to replicate those services so that people don't need to call 911 to find out that we exist, and have that be the main option while someone with a gun is showing up, potentially making it a lot scarier or worse. So we have two resources. I'll share this, the link to this slide deck at the end here. One is to advocate at that systems level, right? So we have some things on here around finding community partners, changing the way things are talked about, right? From if we can't join a movement to defund the police as our agency, we can at least not refute what they're talking about. We can be open and honest about the stories of harms that police cause, especially because groups like the ones that we advocate for are frequently held up as a reason that we need more police or the police need more money. So we can work against those things. We can pay attention to what we're doing inside, and we can figure out how our resources can help those movements. And then on the working with survivors tip, we have this handout about how to safety plan with survivors to get the most help or the most benefit they can. So when we're working with someone who's considering calling the police, these are some of the things that we're up to, of trying to make sure people know their rights and asking some questions about their goals, what they're looking for. We're trying to figure out, what they can expect and being clear there. We're getting ourselves ready in case they want us to call on their behalf, knowing that sometimes that can be more beneficial, that there's certain things that we can say as advocates that might get listened to when they don't listen to the survivor themselves. We're figuring out how to explore other options if we need to, and we're getting ready to safety plan for when things frequently go wrong, unfortunately, right? And talking about the ways that survivors can use their current skill set and resource for de-escalating their abusive partner. Usually they can use those same kind of skills to de-escalate the officer in the moment. It's a really sad reality to have to admit that, and it's one that we come up against all the time. Maybe that's where I'll leave it again for time, just noticing and wanting to, give some space for everyone else. So thanks for being here. I'll share the link to this in the chat and offer my contact info as well.
Thank you. So we are moving on to our last speaker. And as I said, we will have time afterwards if there are questions or if panelists want to wrap up because they lost a little bit of their time. So we're going to turn it over to Lori for her presentation.
All right, thanks, Denise, and I hope everybody can hear me as well. And so I am Lori Pallison. I'm the Executive Director of Safe Journey. And I know we talked from somebody near Pittsburgh and from Philadelphia. I am probably as rural as you can get. I'm in rural Erie County. And so what I'm going to talk to about with my 15 minutes is creating communities united against domestic violence, even despite, COVID's 30% increase in domestic violence. And so most individuals, most communities experience the impact of domestic violence. And so some of you have been trained on domestic violence and understanding the magnitude within our communities. But I wanted to kind of just talk briefly about some of those statistics. So DV affects 1 in 4 women, 1 in 7 men, 1 in 4 children. Additionally, domestic violence has a higher rate among the following populations. So 70% of individuals with disabilities, 44% of lesbian women, 61% of bisexual women, 26% of gay men, 37% of bisexual men, 54% of transgender. African American women are at 29%, Korean women 60%, Vietnamese women 47%, Native American women 37.5%, and in our area 22.5% for rural victims of domestic violence. The other statistics I really wanted to talk about as well is 80% of domestic violence victimization in 2015, the victim did not receive assistance from a domestic violence agency. So you look at that, 80% of victims did not seek services. And so now that we're faced with COVID, that even further puts victims seeking services, that is a barrier. So kind of talking about that level of victimization within our communities. And so I want you to look within your community as well, is if I look at 1 in 4 women, 1 in 7 men, and 1 in 4 children in Erie County, and that's where I'm from, before they turn the age of 18, that's more than 70,000 individuals, victims in Erie County. And each year, Safe Journey and SafeNet, we both serve Erie County, the city of Erie, and also the rural areas outside the city, which we serve. That equates to about 2,500 victims being served. So what we looked at is that it's estimated that 67,000 victims within our community do not seek services. So try to correlate that within your community. How many victims are not seeking services? We also know that victims who seek services from the state recognized domestic violence agencies are less likely to die because of domestic violence. So if you look at that too, is who are we referring victims to? And if they are the state recognized within our, from our Pennsylvania Coalition Against Domestic Violence, they're less likely to die. So getting victims to services prevents death. So only 4% of homicide victims that had used a DV hotline or shelter in the year prior to being killed. So it's really important to understand that getting victims to services saves lives. Something else that you might need to know about victims of domestic violence is that in many cases, accessing services is challenging. And I think all of our domestic violence agencies that serve victims, we're always trying to think of or figure out how do we, reach victims? How do we let them know the services that are available to them? And understanding the barriers that they face while seeking those services. Also, this may be due to everything from social stigmas relating to domestic violence, the shame, the guilt, that goes along with that, to being able to access services. And especially like in our area, due to the lack of transportation, when you don't have busing, you don't have, when you're rural, you're really in an isolated situation. And also, one of the things that abusers are trying to do is to isolate the victim so that further, is a hinder for a victim to reach services. And then, most importantly, why you guys are kind of here and learning about domestic violence. In many cases, individuals, just like yourselves, would not be able to recognize a victim of domestic violence. And if you did, you wouldn't know how to respond to help that victim of domestic violence, being a pro-social bystander. That would allow and assist them to getting the services that are available within your community. So a community where domestic violence is occurring, victims don't know that they're being abused. And if they do, they often don't know where to receive services or what services are available to them. And also a community that is not supportive either because they have misperceptions about domestic violence, or because they just don't know how to help a victim, or they don't want to further hurt a victim, because oftentimes we don't know what to say. We don't know how to respond. So In 2017, we had a vision, where a community understood, first of all, what is domestic violence, so that they understood what domestic violence is, and they knew how to be an active bystander. We believe that if a community set up safe places within their community, everyday locations, and that would be from a grocery store to an auto parts store to a hair salon, a bank, the post office, the bank, and so many more areas within your community that our victims are allowed to go into. If we can give them the ability to become a safe place to let victims know where services are available to them, and provide those employees of those safe places domestic violence information that they could give to a victim, and that a victim would be able to come into their safe, inconspicuous place and receive information about services that are available to them. So Purple One was born. And Purple One program consists of 3 parts. So first of all is train individuals and employees at businesses and organizations across the county, across the country, to recognize, respond to, and most importantly, refer victims to state recognized organizations. And so in Erie County, that would be Safe Journey. So organizations who had individuals trained would be able to apply to become a certified safe place. The second part of Purple One, that we're talking about, is safe places. These safe places are listed on the Safe Place Finder online, and also a Safe Place Finder app that we're currently creating. And what that would let victims know is that where around you are safe places within your community. So in Erie County, right now, we have 80 safe places that victims could seek services or seek referrals to our agency. Aside from the safe places, they're not counseling centers. We're not training anybody to be counselors. What we're really creating is that referral network, is to get them to the state certified domestic violence agency. The third and final part of the Purple One is to tell victims that these services are available to them, and to let them know and to look for the Purple One dot in a business window or the top of the Safe Place Finder, or download from the Safe Place app to find a safe place near them. So in 2018, Purple One program began the rural South Erie County focus on communities in Corry and Union City. And that's where Purple One really developed, was in our rural area. And to date, we have more than 500 individuals who have been trained in domestic violence awareness and pro-social bystander intervention. And we call this the Purple One training. This training has been so successful that it's been deemed evidence-based. We work with Penn State Core that has done all of our evaluations. So we're really excited about the effectiveness of this program and how it has reached and what has done to bring communities united against domestic violence, and especially in our rural area. Participants have showed an increase of knowledge, likelihood of taking action to assist victims, and 20% of the participants had already helped the victim within the first few weeks of the training. Local organizations have found this training to be very something that they wanted their whole organization to take. So this is something that they're continuing to send all of their staff and their employees, and we're now pushing it more into Erie County. And for the most important aspect of this program, Safe Journey alone saw a 200% increase in victim calls, since the implementation of this campaign. But prior to Purple One, Safe Journey saw about 4 referrals a month. And now, since we've implemented this program, we are receiving about 17 referrals a month. And that's pretty significant when you're talking about a rural area. Why I keep saying rural is that a lot of times, if we can make it happen here and it's working and it's really uniting a community, this also can happen within your community. And then we're talking about also about the coordinated community response. Many of times, some of you that are sitting here watching this, are part of a coordinated community response. And, it's that multidisciplinary team, that's helping the community address domestic violence, take a, look at it. How do we help domestic violence agencies? Because the important thing is to understand we're one piece of the puzzle. We really need a united community to help us address domestic violence. And so Purple One really came out of, this coordinated community response that we started in 2015. And because of the Ray Rice, incident that happened, I was trying to do a walk a mile in a shoe event, trying to get men involved. And all of a sudden there was such, people wanted to come and help. People wanted to be a part of this solution. And so we applied for an OVW grant, and to my surprise, we were awarded a $750,000 OVW grant that just, we just was a 3-year grant that is done. But there was so much that was built out of that OVW funds, and so it really gave us the ability to create such a program that truly impacted our community. And like I said, to date, I have 500 individuals who have taken the training, 80 safe places in a rural area to let victims know that services are available, and that if you look at the increase of referrals that are coming, and it really was boots on the ground. We just really went out there and we talked to our community, all different stakeholders. When you look at CCRs, coordinated community response teams, there are certain people who are asked. We asked a variety of individuals to come to the table, whether you're clergy, whether you're, even the auto parts store, individual, took the training and realized, he wanted to make a difference. People really came out of the woodwork to learn about Purple One, to learn about what they could do, because this tool really gave them the ability to figure out what they can do and how they can, help victims. And so, so we were very, very excited about this program. It's still going quite strong, and we're continuing to do more Purple One trainings. This is something that we are also bringing out to other communities that want to take on Purple One. And so I just, understanding that it really takes communities to help us address domestic violence, that you are someone who can make a difference. You are someone who can help us reach victims and help them get to those safe places, because, getting victims to safe places, getting them to the DV agencies saves lives. And so I wanted to thank you guys all for, coming and listening to our panel about domestic violence. We all brought a different component to that. And so now I'm going to hand it over to Denise.
Thank you so much. So to all the presenters, thank you for sharing your important information. I really want all the attendees to understand that all of our services are free and confidential. So when you have someone connect to one of our domestic violence programs for any of the issues that were raised here, so for mental health, for dealing with law enforcement, for becoming an active bystander, any of those calls that you make are confidential. So if a survivor calls a program, there's no way that other people are going to be able to know that they're making that call. We do have a few minutes left. I have been monitoring the chat and the Q&A. As of now, there have been no questions, but I encourage you, as you're wrapping up and thinking about the information that others have shared here in this presentation, that you go ahead and add those questions to either the chat or the Q&A. And panelists, before I jump to the group questions that we came up with, I know we kind of cut everybody off. Is there anything you'd like to say to wrap up your particular piece of this workshop? So first, Jeff and Leon, any last words that you'd like to wrap up?
Sure. Yeah, I think that just to wrap up, I think one of the things we were going to go forward with was that in the reforming part of this kind of theme that we were talking about, that really goes to building out other community resources that address, we're trying to work with students and youth in prevention education, but I think that prevention education also goes to providing trauma-informed care and resources to teachers and faculty and staff at these schools and at the various counseling levels for the schools, because they've all been through a really traumatic experience with the pandemic as well. And they're, looking at the statistics, we know that adults are not also getting that care. We can't have we can't expect students to have a mentally healthy environment to grow up in if the teachers are mentally burnt out or the faculty and staff are mentally burnt out. Just the last highlight program, one of the things that is a new offering that we're going to be doing is an Expressive Therapeutic writing program, and that's going to be working with a number of different school districts. And we're also hoping to move into the juvenile delinquency center in Allegheny County to hopefully work with them to process some of that. This is just, we're not wizards, we're not professionals at the therapeutic level. Leon and I, we're educators, but the programming that we can do is going to help students get that self-care ability to deal with some anxiety, some stress. So I just want to cover up with that and also highlight the work of Steel Smiling Pittsburgh. They work in their own communities to kind of give out trauma-informed counseling licenses to individuals and build that up so that it's a series of resources in those smaller communities. And so I just wanted to highlight the work they do.
Great, thank you. Toby, any last words you would like to wrap up with?
I think I would just end with a big thank you to Jeff and Leon and Lori for bringing the resources that we all need. I think that's what it is to be in this movement, is to take care of each other, take care of the people we're working with, and bring more people into the movement. Thanks, everybody.
Yeah, thank you, Toby and Lori, everybody. This has been great. Thank you so much.
Lori, any final thoughts from your end?
I do. I just wanted to, because all three of our agencies are funded and by the Pennsylvania Coalition Against Domestic Violence. And the one thing that through COVID, when we're talking about rebuilding and reforming, is that most of our agencies through COVID really went through transformation. And so our transformation was, how do we reach victims? How do we go out there, despite COVID, despite, all of these things is, how do we, and we did. We were afforded financial resources within all of our agencies to really help us become, to reform our services and to really meet the needs of the victims that we're serving, especially like in rural. How do you meet with them, outside or, and so I wanted everybody to understand is that all of the PCDV agencies, that are within your community really have stepped up and are providing amazing services to address the need of domestic violence.
Thank you, Lori. Yes, that is really extremely important for folks that are participating in this to understand. We have not stopped. COVID has not stopped the domestic violence programs from providing services. We've moved to online phone calls through DoxyMe. We've moved to doing some stuff through Zoom. We've moved to doing groups in a variety of different platforms. And if their shelter did not remain open because of COVID, we were able to help get funding from the federal government to put folks into hotels. So I don't know if that was one of our questions for the panel, if you wanted to talk a little bit more, in case there are folks from your communities, what's been going on in terms of services that have changed specifically for your organization, your agency for COVID. Just a brief mention of that. Toby, as I understand it, the 200-bed shelter in Philadelphia did not close down. Is that correct?
Yep, yeah, that's correct. Our sister agency, Women Against Abuse, runs the shelter, and it's been open the entire time. They have had 2 COVID incidents where they haven't closed. Thankfully, they have the 2 locations and they're able to reconfigure. And there's been, I think, in the past year and a half, maybe 2 weeks where they couldn't accept a new intake person because of COVID, but otherwise totally fine. And for those folks who can't get into the shelter right then, we have an emergency placement program to keep people safe until the shelter is able to accept them.
Right. And as I understand it, there are mitigation factors happening within shelters so that there is mask wearing. They've reconfigured how people interact in common spaces. So there's a shuffling around of numbers of people in a particular area. Is that correct as well?
Yeah, that's also what I've heard. as well as providing more meals to go. So it's been kind of a dance around a community feel, but safety. And so there's been a lot of more encouraging people to come and get food from the kitchen and take it back to a smaller space to eat a little safer.
Great, thank you. Jeff and Leon, what are some of your changes?
With the peer-to-peer empowerment program, since it was the workshops that we had and we'd bring 150 kids in there, really concerned how we were going to be able to pull that off. But we were able to do it virtually. And the schools, and again, the students responded unbelievably as to how they came up with overcoming that problem of COVID and the issues going on with their school, to still be able to develop projects and do things that are positive within their school. So, I mean, they again, that shows you that what the students can do when given the chance to do that.
And we also started using in the prevention education department Nearpod, which is a learning management system, and that's allows us to do a lot of different kind of virtual presentations and community discussion boards. So to put schools in communication with one another, to share their experiences, talk about different successes that they've had in keeping their healthy relationships going over the pandemic.
And Lori, do you want to highlight any changes you all have made?
Well, they were significant changes within our building, within how we provide services. Before people would have to share rooms. So it really took us to rethink about how we're providing services to victims of domestic violence. So, and then also, with the ability to Zoom and to do support groups, through Zoom, there was really a transformation. And I really think that it really made us a more, the ability to serve victims on so many different levels. And, we really went through a horrible, pandemic, with COVID. It did allow us to really become who we needed to become to really service victims. And so I'm grateful for that part, that we can think outside the box and figure out ways to serve victims. So it really was transformational. It was rough, but it was transformational, because I know every person on this, on the Zoom, through your work, through, really, it was transformational through whatever environment you were. But as agencies and as shelter, we never shut down either, in a rural area. But what we really have found is that victims weren't seeking services. They're staying with abusers in our area. We're now, full to capacity, but that was a long time coming, because a lot of times victims were staying in a rural area. So that was our push is, how do we get victims to services, even if they're going to stay, so.
Great. Thank you so much to Jeff, Leon, Toby, and Lori. I really appreciate all those attendees who have chosen to listen to this panel. I know that information is going to be available to all the attendees to allow them to be able to follow up with presenters if that is something that they need to do. And just remember, sometimes you are the only lifeline for a survivor to be able to get to one of our programs. Especially with COVID and being stuck at home, if you can invite somebody that might be having an issue to your home to make a call in a safe place, that would be an excellent opportunity for you to be able to connect someone with services. And I guess I will turn it over to Lisa, because I assume you may have final wrap up for folks as well.
Yes, thank you, Denise. And thank you to all the presenters. I learned a lot today, and I want to express sincere appreciation for your capacity to innovate, respond, and still assist survivors in one of the most difficult and challenging times I think any of us have faced in our lifetimes. So thank you for all of your hard work, and thank you for sharing your expertise with us today. So with that, we will close this session. The next session will begin at 11:30, and that will be a pop-up. So take a short break, and we will see you at 11:30. Thanks.
Thank you.